The emergency klaxon screamed through the research vessel Prometheus as Dr. Sarah Chen fought to maintain control of the failing ship. Sparks flew from overloaded consoles while the artificial gravity fluctuated wildly, sending loose equipment floating through the bridge before crashing back down. Through the main viewport, the rust-colored surface of Kepler 442c grew larger with each passing second. Hull breach in sections 4 through 7. Aria, the ship's AI, announced with mechanical calm but contrasted sharply with the chaos around them. Life support compromised. Estimated time until complete atmospheric loss, 12 minutes. Sarah's hands flew over the emergency controls, her training taking over despite the terror clawing at her chest. 3 years of deep space research mapping uncharted systems for the Earth Colonial Authority, and it all came down to this. A cascade failure triggered by a micrometeorite that had somehow slipped past their deflector shields. "What about the escape pods?" she shouted, over the noise of buckling metal. "Pod bay destroyed in initial impact. Emergency beacon is non-functional. I'm sorry, Dr. Chen, but I cannot establish communication with any nearby vessels." Sarah's stomach dropped. The nearest human settlement was 47 light-years away. Even if someone picked up a distress signal, it would take decades for help to arrive. She glanced at the navigation display. They were in disputed space, technically neutral territory between human and Zeltharian territories, but that meant nothing when you were about to become a crater. "Aria, can you plot a controlled descent? Somewhere with a breathable atmosphere?" "Negative. The planet's atmosphere is 73% nitrogen, 24% oxygen, with trace amounts of argon and carbon dioxide. However, the atmospheric pressure is insufficient for human survival without environmental suits. Additionally, surface temperature ranges from -40 to +60 degrees Celsius. "Better than vacuum," Sarah muttered, strapping herself into the pilot's seat. "Plot the best landing site you can find, somewhere flat, away from any geological activity." The ship shuddered violently as they hit the upper atmosphere. Sarah watched helplessly as systems failed one by one. Life support, artificial gravity, main engines.
The emergency thrusters were all that stood between them and complete destruction.
That's when she noticed the second ship. It was sleek and silver, unmistakably Zeltharian in design, and it was falling alongside them. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized the configuration. A scout vessel, probably on a reconnaissance mission. The Zeltharians and humans had been locked in a Cold War for 30 years, ever since first contact had gone catastrophically wrong. Neither species trusted the other, and encounters in neutral space often ended in violence. "Aria, scan that Zeltharian vessel. Are they hostile?" Unable to determine hostile intent. The vessel appears to be experiencing similar system failures. Their hull shows impact damage consistent with meteorite strikes. Sarah stared at the alien ship as they both plummeted toward the planet's surface. The pilot was probably struggling with the same impossible situation she faced. For a moment, she considered the irony. Two enemies about to die together on a world neither had ever intended to visit. The surface rushed up to meet them. Sarah closed her eyes and braced for impact. The crash was violent but not fatal. The Prometheus skidded across a flat plain of red rock and crystalline formations before coming to rest against a low hill. Sarah's head rang from the impact, and she tasted blood in her mouth, but she was alive. Around her, emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows through the bridge. "Aria? System status?" Silence. The AI was offline, probably permanently. Sarah unbuckled herself with shaking hands and made her way to the emergency locker. Inside, she found her environmental suit, a bulky but reliable piece of equipment that would keep her alive for up to 72 hours. As she struggled into the suit, her mind raced through her options. The ship's emergency supplies would last perhaps a week, maybe 2 if she was careful. The planet was clearly uninhabitable in the long term. Too cold, atmosphere too thin, and no signs of life that could sustain her. But perhaps she could jury-rig a beacon, find a way to boost the signal strength. It was a long shot, but humans were good at long shots. Once suited up, Sarah activated the airlock and stepped outside. The landscape was alien, but beautiful in its own way. Rolling plains of red stone dotted with towering crystal formations that caught and reflected the pale light of the system's distant star. The sky was a washed-out orange and the horizon seemed impossibly far away under the low atmospheric pressure. She was adjusting her suit's heating system when she saw the smoke rising from beyond the nearest hill. The Zeltharian ship had crashed less than a kilometer away. Sarah hesitated. Everything she'd been taught, every briefing about first contact protocols, warned against approaching Zeltharians without backup. They were taller than humans, stronger, with natural weapons and technology that could kill her before she knew what hit her. But they were also intelligent, and if their pilot was alive, they were probably facing the same survival challenges she was. Against her better judgment, Sarah began walking toward the crash site. The Zeltharian vessel had fared worse than hers. It had struck a cluster of crystal formations and rolled several times before coming to rest on its side. The hull was cracked in multiple places, and Sarah could see atmosphere venting from the damaged sections. As she approached, her suit's sensors detected movement inside. "Hello?" she called over the radio, broadcasting on standard first contact frequencies. "This is Dr. Dyer, Sarah Chen of the Earth vessel Prometheus. Can you hear me?" Static filled her comm for several seconds. Then, a voice responded, deep, resonant, speaking accented but clear English. "Human vessel. I hear you. I am Navigator Kethvar of the exploration ship Wind Through Stars. My systems are compromised." Sarah could see him now through a crack in the hull. Tall and lean, with the characteristic blue-gray skin and elongated features of his species. He was struggling with something inside his damaged ship, and she could see that his own environmental suit was torn along one arm. "Your suit is damaged," she observed. "How long can you survive in this atmosphere?" "Perhaps 6 of your hours, no more. My ship's life support is failing." There was a pause. "You should leave, human. When I die, return to your vessel. Do not risk yourself for an enemy." Sarah stared at him through the crack in his ship's hull. An enemy. That's what he was, technically. Her own government would probably court-martial her for what she was about to do. "I'm going to help you," she said, moving closer to the damaged hull. "Can you widen this opening? Why would you do this thing? Our peoples are at war. Because we're both stranded on a dead world, and we'll have a better chance of survival if we work together," Sarah replied, beginning to examine the hull breach. "Besides, I took an oath to preserve life wherever I found it. That includes Zeltharian life." She heard what might have been a laugh from inside the ship. "You humans are truly strange creatures." "Yeah, we get that a lot." Working together, they managed to widen the hull breach enough for Kethvar to squeeze through. Up close, Sarah could see just how badly damaged his suit was. The environmental seals were failing, and his breathing apparatus was cracked. Without immediate help, he would die within hours. "My ship has spare environmental equipment," Sarah offered. "It's designed for humans, but it might work for you." Kethvar studied her for a long moment. He was nearly 2 meters tall, with sharp features and large dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His people were predators by evolution, and even injured and vulnerable, there was something dangerous about him. "You would trust me in your ship?" he asked. "Do I have a choice? We're both dead if we don't cooperate." They made their way back to the Prometheus together. Sarah's mind was already racing ahead, calculating supplies and resources. Food would be the biggest challenge. Zeltharian and human physiologies were different enough that they couldn't share rations. But perhaps they could find ways to supplement their diet from the planet's mineral resources. Inside her ship, Sarah helped Kethvar out of his damaged suit and into one of her spares. It was too small for his frame, but the emergency modifications she made would keep him alive. As she worked, she found herself studying his features, the sharp angles of his face, the way his skin seemed to shimmer slightly in the ship's lighting, the careful precision of his movements. "Your name is Sarah Chen," he said as she adjusted the suit's atmospheric mix for his physiology. "I have heard of you." Sarah looked up in surprise. "You have? Your research into stellar cartography. It has been studied by my people. Your methods are unconventional but effective. You read my papers?" Sarah couldn't hide her amazement. Academic exchange between human and Zeltharian space was virtually non-existent. "Knowledge is valuable regardless of its source," Kethvar replied. "Though I admit, I did not expect to meet you under these circumstances." Sarah finished adjusting his suit and stepped back. "Well, now that we're both breathing, I suppose we should figure out how to stay alive long enough for rescue. You believe rescue is possible?" Sarah gestured toward her ship's damaged communication array. "Maybe. If we can boost the signal strength, find a way to penetrate the atmospheric interference. It'll take time, and we'll need to work together." Kethvar was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. "My people will not come for me. This was a solo reconnaissance mission. If I do not return, they will assume I was captured or killed. Then we'll have to rescue ourselves." Over the next several hours, they conducted a thorough inventory of their combined resources. The situation was grim but not hopeless. Between both ships, they had enough food and water for perhaps 3 weeks. The Prometheus had a small hydroponic garden that might supplement their diet if they could keep it running. Most importantly, both ships had manufacturing capabilities, limited but perhaps sufficient to build what they needed to survive. The crystal formations, Kethvar observed as they studied sensor readings of the surrounding area. They appear to be naturally occurring semiconductor crystals. With proper refinement, they could be used to amplify communication signals. Sarah nodded. The question is whether we can harvest and process them with our limited equipment.
I have some experience with crystal matrix engineering, Kethvar said.
It is a hobby of mine. Sarah looked at him with new respect. Then we might actually have a chance. As the planet's pale sun set beyond the horizon, casting long shadows across the crystalline landscape, Sarah found herself sitting across from her unlikely companion in the ship's small common area. They had spent the day planning their survival strategy, and despite everything, the crash, the isolation, the fact that they were supposed to be enemies, she felt a strange sense of optimism. Tell me about your home, Kethvar said suddenly. I have read about Earth in intelligence reports, but I would like to hear about it from someone who has lived there. Sarah smiled, surprising herself. It's beautiful. Blue oceans, green forests, cities that stretch toward the sky. When I was a child, I used to lie in the grass and watch the stars, wondering what was out there. And now you know. Now I know there's more than I ever imagined.
She looked at him curiously.
What about your world? What is Zelthar like? Silver cities beneath purple skies, he said, his voice taking on a distant quality. Mountains that sing in the wind, and seas that glow with bioluminescent life. It is peaceful, usually. Do you have family there? Kethvar hesitated. I had a mate. She died in one of the border skirmishes 3 cycles ago. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy. I'm sorry. War takes much from all of us, he replied quietly. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Outside, the alien landscape was bathed in the light of 2 small moons, giving everything an ethereal, dreamlike quality. Sarah, Kethvar said eventually, why did you really help me? Your people and mine have killed each other for decades. It would have been easier to let me die. Sarah considered the question. Because that's not who I am. Maybe that's not who humans are. Not really. We fight when we have to, but we also help when we can. I couldn't live with myself if I'd walked away. Kethvar studied her for a long moment. Your species is indeed strange. Is that bad? No, he said quietly. I think perhaps it is what makes you extraordinary. As they prepared for sleep, taking shifts to monitor their life support systems, Sarah found herself thinking about the days ahead. They had a plan, limited resources, and no guarantee of success. But for the first time since the crash, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. And in the quiet darkness of the ship, listening to the steady breathing of her alien companion, she began to understand that survival might be only the beginning of their story. The morning of their 3rd day on Kepler, 442c brought new challenges and unexpected discoveries. Sarah woke to find frost covering the interior walls of the ship. The heating system was struggling to maintain temperature, as the planet's thin atmosphere provided little insulation against the bitter cold of space. Kethvar was already awake, studying readings from the ship's sensors with the intense focus she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of his species. His modified environmental suit hummed quietly as it worked to keep him alive in the alien atmosphere. The temperature dropped to minus 62 degrees Celsius last night, he reported without looking up. Our power consumption for heating increased by 37%. Sarah rubbed her hands together, trying to work warmth back into her fingers.
At that rate, we'll drain our fusion cells in 8 days instead of 3 weeks. I have been thinking about this problem, Kethvar said, finally turning to face her. The crystal formations we observed yesterday, they may offer a solution. How so? On Zelthar, we use similar crystals to create thermal regulation fields.
If we could harvest enough of the proper type, we might construct a passive heating system that requires no power. Sarah moved to the sensor console, studying the readings from their brief survey the day before. The crystalline structures dotted the landscape for kilometers in every direction, some reaching heights of 50 meters or more. They appeared to be composed of various mineral compounds, many of which she didn't recognize. We'd need to go outside to collect samples, she said. In this cold, our suit's power will drain quickly. Then we work efficiently, Kethvar replied. I will identify the proper crystals. Your knowledge of human technology will help us determine how to integrate them with your ship's systems. They spent an hour planning the expedition, mapping routes to nearby crystal formations, and calculating how much material they would need. Sarah found herself impressed by Kethvar's systematic approach. He thought like an engineer, considering multiple variables and backup plans. Suited up and equipped with cutting tools, they ventured out into the frigid landscape. The cold was beyond anything Sarah had experienced. Even through her suit's insulation, she could feel it trying to leach the warmth from her body. Her breath fogged the faceplate despite the suit's environmental controls. Kethvar moved with surprising grace across the uneven terrain, his longer legs and natural balance giving him an advantage. He led her to a cluster of translucent blue crystals that seemed to pulse within a light. "These," he said, running a gloved hand along the surface. "They absorb and redistribute thermal energy. On my world, we call them heartstones because they hold the warmth of life." Working together, they cut away sections of crystal using the ship's emergency tools. The work was slow and difficult. The crystals were harder than diamond and required precise cuts to avoid shattering. Sarah watched Kethvar work, noting the careful attention he paid to the crystal's natural structure. "You said this was a hobby," she observed. "You're better than anyone I've seen." "My mate was a crystal engineer," he replied quietly. "She taught me to see the patterns, to understand how energy flows through the matrix structures." Sarah heard the pain in his voice and chose not to press further. Instead, she focused on learning his techniques, watching how he analyzed each crystal before making his cuts. They returned to the ship with a substantial collection of samples, but the expedition had cost them. Sarah's suit was down to 30% power, and Kethvar's jury-rigged equipment was showing signs of strain. They would need to be more careful about future excursions. Inside the ship's small engineering bay, they began the delicate process of integrating the Zeltharian crystals with human technology. It should have been impossible. Their species' approaches to engineering were fundamentally different. Humans favored robust, adaptable systems that could be repaired and modified. Zeltharians built elegant, efficient devices that worked in perfect harmony with natural forces. But somehow, Sarah found that their different approaches complemented each other. "Your power coupling is too rigid," Kethvar observed as Sarah worked to connect a crystal array to the ship's heating system. "The crystals need to resonate freely, and your crystal matrix needs a more stable power supply," Sarah countered. "These fluctuations will cause the whole system to fail." They worked for hours debating, experimenting, and slowly finding solutions that neither could have achieved alone. Sarah's engineering training taught her to think in terms of controlled systems and predictable outcomes. Kethvar's approach was more intuitive, understanding how different components would interact and flow together. "Try it now," Sarah said, activating the hybrid heating system they had created. The crystals began to glow with a soft blue light, and within minutes, Sarah could feel the temperature in the engineering bay starting to rise. The power consumption readings dropped to nearly zero. The crystals were absorbing ambient thermal energy from outside the ship and redistributing it throughout their living space. "It works," she breathed, hardly believing it. "Of course it works," Kethvar said, and Sarah was surprised to hear what sounded like amusement in his voice. "Human stubbornness combined with Zeltharian understanding, perhaps our species are more compatible than our governments believe." That evening, with their immediate survival needs addressed, they turned their attention to the larger challenge of rescue. Sarah's communication array had been damaged in the crash, but with the right modifications, it might be possible to boost its range significantly. "The problem is power," Sarah explained, showing Kethvar the schematics on her portable computer. "To punch a signal through the atmospheric interference and reach the nearest inhabited system, we'd need at least 10 times our current output. What if we used the planet itself as an amplifier?" Kethvar suggested. Sarah looked at him blankly. "What do you mean?" "The crystal formations. They cover most of this continent. If we could create a resonance pattern across multiple sites, we might be able to generate a focused transmission beam." Sarah stared at the sensor data, her mind racing. It was an audacious idea, requiring them to travel across hundreds of kilometers of hostile terrain to place transmitter nodes at specific crystal formations. The logistics alone seemed impossible. "It would take weeks," she said. "Maybe months, and we'd need to build everything from scratch using salvaged components. Do we have a better option?" Sarah considered their alternatives. They could wait and hope that someone would eventually search this system, but that might take years or decades. They could try to repair one of the ships well enough for orbital flight, but neither vessel had the parts needed for such extensive repairs. "No," she admitted. "I don't think we do." Over the following days, they threw themselves into the project with single-minded determination. Sarah's ship became a workshop where they cannibalized components from both vessels, creating devices that had never existed before. Kethvar's knowledge of crystal resonance combined with Sarah's understanding of human communications technology produced designs that were part science, part art. They worked 18-hour days, taking breaks only to eat and sleep. Sarah found herself learning to think like a Zaltharian, considering how energy flowed and resonated, rather than simply how circuits connected. Kethvar, in turn, began to understand human concepts of redundancy and fail-safe systems. "Your people plan for everything to break," he observed one evening as Sarah showed him how to build backup power systems into their transmitter nodes. "Experience," Sarah replied. "Humans have a talent for breaking things accidentally. We learn to design accordingly. Zaltharians prefer to build things so perfectly that they cannot break. And when they do break," Kethvar was quiet for a moment, "then we learn to live without them." Sarah looked at him, understanding something new about his species. "Is that why you were alone on that scout ship? Because you learned to live without others?" "Perhaps," he said. "After Veltara died, I found it difficult to be around others of my kind. They reminded me of what I had lost. But you're not alone now." Kethvar met her eyes, and Sarah saw something she hadn't noticed before. A warmth that seemed to go beyond mere partnership. "No," he said quietly. "I am not alone now." As the days passed, Sarah began to notice other changes in their relationship. The initial wariness and formal politeness had given way to easy companionship. They developed their own rhythms and routines, learning each other's habits and preferences. Kethvar would wake early to check their systems and gather weather data. Sarah would prepare their morning meal and review the previous day's progress. They shared stories about their homes, their work, their hopes for the future. Sarah learned that Kethvar was not just a navigator but also a poet, composing verses about the beauty of space and the loneliness of long voyages. Kethvar discovered that Sarah had trained as a dancer before becoming a scientist, and that she still practiced the ancient forms in her ship's small exercise area. One evening, as they worked together to calibrate a particularly complex transmitter node, Sarah became aware of how close they were sitting. She could smell the faint, spicy scent that seemed natural to his species, could see the way the blue veins pulsed gently beneath his grey skin. When he turned to point out a detail on their schematic, his face was only inches from hers. "Sarah," he said softly, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. "Yes? I want you to know that these have been the most meaningful days of my life since Veltara's death, not because of our work, but because of your companionship." Sarah felt her heart race. She'd been trying to ignore her growing attraction to him, telling herself it was just proximity and shared danger. But looking into his large, dark eyes, she realized she had been lying to herself. "Kethvar," she began, but he held up a hand. "I know this is impossible," he said. "Our species are different, our peoples are enemies. When rescue comes, we will be separated, and this time will become only a memory." "Then why tell me?" "Because truth deserves to be spoken, even if it can lead nowhere." Sarah reached out and touched his hand. Even through their gloves, she could feel the warmth of his skin. "Maybe it doesn't have to lead nowhere." They worked in silence for the rest of the evening, but something had changed between them. The air seemed charged with possibility and danger in equal measure. That night, as Sarah lay in her bunk listening to the quiet sounds of the ship, she found herself thinking about the future differently. Before the crash, her life had been dedicated to exploration and discovery, to pushing the boundaries of human knowledge. She had never seriously considered settling down, starting a family, building a life with someone else. Now, stranded on an alien world with a man from a species she had been taught to fear, she found herself imagining possibilities she had never dared to consider. The next morning brought a breakthrough. Working together, they had completed their first long-range transmitter node, a hybrid device that combined human electronics with Zaltharian crystal technology in ways that should have been impossible. The device was beautiful, its crystalline components glowing with soft inner light as energy flowed through carefully structured matrices. "It's magnificent," Sarah breathed as they powered up the device for its first test. "It is the best work of my life," Kethvar agreed, "and I could not have created it without you." The test was successful beyond their expectations. The node generated a focused transmission beam with nearly 15 times the power of Sarah's original communications array. If they could build 5 more such devices and place them at the proper locations, they would have their rescue beacon. But as they celebrated their success, Neither of them mentioned the fact that rescue would mean separation. Neither spoke of what would happen when ships from their respective species arrived to take them home. For now, they had work to do and time to be together. And in the strange, crystal-lit landscape of their alien refuge, that seemed like enough. The storm hit without warning on their 15th day on Kepler, 442c. Sarah woke to the sound of howling wind and the ship groaning under forces it was never designed to withstand. Emergency lights bathed everything in red as atmospheric pressure readings fluctuated wildly. "Kefar," she called, but he was already moving, checking their jury-rig systems with practiced efficiency. "Massive pressure front moving across the continent," he reported, his voice tense. "Wind speeds exceeding 200 kilometers per hour. The storm will last at least 18 hours. Sarah pulled up weather data on her portable scanner, cursing the planet's unpredictable atmospheric patterns. The storm was enormous, a swirling mass of superheated air and crystalline debris that stretched across half the continent. Outside, she could hear fragments of crystal striking the ship's hull like bullets. "Our heating system," she said suddenly. "If the external crystals are damaged..." They rushed to the engineering bay, where their hybrid thermal regulation system hummed quietly. The crystal matrices they had so carefully installed were already showing stress fractures as the violent atmospheric conditions disrupted their resonance patterns. "We need to shut it down," Kefar said. "If the matrices shatter under this stress, the feedback could damage the ship's systems." Sarah's hands moved quickly over the controls, bringing their life support back to emergency power. Almost immediately, she could feel the temperature beginning to drop. In the storm's chaos with no external thermal regulation, they would be fighting a losing battle against the planet's killing cold. "How long will our power reserves last for heating?" Kefar asked. Sarah did the calculations in her head and didn't like the answer. "Maybe 10 hours, 12 if we shut down everything non-essential." They worked together to minimize power consumption, shutting down all but the most critical systems. The ship fell into an eerie twilight, lit only by a few emergency panels and the pale glow of their environmental suits displays. As the hours passed and the temperature continued to drop, they retreated to the ship's smallest compartment, the emergency medical bay, and sealed it off from the rest of the vessel. By concentrating their body heat in the confined space, they could conserve precious energy. "Tell me more about your dancing," Kefar said as they huddled together in the darkened room. "On Zelthar, we have something similar, movement that expresses the harmony between body and spirit." Sarah found herself describing the ancient earth forms she had studied: ballet, contemporary dance, the flowing martial arts that combined combat with meditation. As she spoke, she demonstrated some of the basic positions, her movements graceful even in the bulky environmental suit. "Show me," she said when Kefar mentioned the Zeltharian practices. Despite the cramped space and difficult conditions, he began to move through a series of flowing gestures that seemed to capture something essential about his species' relationship with their environment. His movements were precise but never rigid, purposeful but never forced. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, watching the way he seemed to inhabit each position completely before flowing into the next. "Dance is about connection," Kefar said, settling back beside her. "Connection to oneself, to others, to the greater patterns that govern existence." As the storm raged outside and the temperature in their shelter dropped toward dangerous levels, Sarah found herself moving closer to Kefar. At first, she told herself it was purely practical. They needed to share body heat to survive. But as they pressed together in the darkness, she became acutely aware of him as more than just a survival partner. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I must tell you something that may disturb you." "What is it?" "My species has certain physiological responses to stress and proximity that yours may not share. If we remain this close, you may notice changes in my biochemistry." Sarah could indeed smell something different about him, a warmer, richer scent that seemed to make her pulse quicken. "What kind of changes?" "Zeltharians form very strong emotional and physical bonds with those we trust completely. In dangerous situations, these bonds can become intense." Sarah understood what he was trying to tell her. She had been feeling something similar, a growing attraction that went beyond mere companionship, an awareness of him that seemed to intensify with every hour they spent together.
"I've been feeling something too," she admitted.
"I tried to convince myself it was just the circumstances, but I don't think it is." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the storm and the sound of each other's breathing. Sarah found herself studying his profile in the dim light, noting the sharp angles of his features, the way his skin seemed to glow faintly with its own inner light. "On Zelthar," he said eventually, When two individuals form a deep bond, there are ceremonies to honor the connection, rituals that acknowledge the joining of two spirits. What are they like? The couple shares their breath, their heartbeat, their deepest thoughts. They dance together, the patterns that will bind their energies for life. He paused. It is not something done lightly. Sarah felt her heart racing. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I am saying that in the traditions of my people, I would ask you to be my mate. Here, now, in this place where we have learned to trust each other completely. The words hung between them in the cold darkness. Sarah knew this was a moment that would change everything, not just for them personally, but potentially for the relationship between their species. And what would happen after the ceremony? She asked. We would be bound by more than law or custom. Our life forces would be connected at the deepest level. What affects one would affect the other. We would share not just our bodies, but our very essence. Sarah considered this. Everything she knew about first contact protocols warned against exactly this kind of intimate involvement with an alien species. She could be court-martialed, imprisoned, exiled from human space. But sitting there in the darkness, feeling the warmth of his presence and the rightness of their connection, she found that she didn't care about protocols. Yes, she whispered. Kethvar turned to face her fully, his dark eyes searching her face. Do you understand what this means? There is no undoing such a bond once it is formed. I understand. What followed was unlike anything Sarah had ever experienced. Kethvar guided her through the ancient rituals of his people, teaching her the breathing patterns that synchronized their life rhythms, the movements that aligned their bioelectric fields. As they danced together in the tiny space, Sarah felt something fundamental shift inside her. She began to sense his emotions as if they were her own. His joy at their connection, his amazement at the compatibility between their species. His deep love for her, that had grown from admiration to something far deeper. In return, she opened her own heart completely, sharing her thoughts and feelings without reservation. When the physical joining came, it was both alien and familiar, a blending of human passion with something deeper and more primal. Sarah felt as if barriers she hadn't known existed were dissolving, leaving her connected to Kethvar in ways she couldn't fully understand but didn't need to question. Afterwards, they lay together in the darkness, and Sarah became aware of new sensations. She could feel his heartbeat as if it were her own, could sense the flow of energy through his body, could even catch fragments of his thoughts and memories. Is this normal? She asked, marveling at the intimacy of the connection. For bonded pairs, yes. You will find that our emotional and physical states are now linked. When I am injured, you will feel pain. When you are happy, I will share that joy. Sarah tested the connection experimentally, focusing on a feeling of contentment and warmth. She felt Kethvar's breathing change as he experienced her emotions secondhand. This is incredible, she breathed. It is the deepest form of trust my people know, he replied. And now we are no longer just Sarah and Kethvar. We are something new. The storm passed during the night, leaving behind a transformed landscape. When they emerged from their shelter, they found that the violent winds had exposed new crystal formations and created natural sculptures of impossible beauty. The air was cleaner too, as if the planet had somehow purged itself of accumulated atmospheric toxins. More importantly, their thermal regulation system had survived the storm with only minor damage. Working together, and Sarah noticed how much more intuitive their collaboration felt now, they repaired the stress fractures and brought the system back online. We should test our long-range transmitter, Sarah suggested as they completed the repairs. If it survived the storm undamaged, we can begin planning the placement of additional nodes. But as they hiked to their first transmitter site, Sarah found herself hesitant to check the device's functionality. The successful completion of their rescue beacon would mean the end of their time together, the end of this strange, perfect existence they had created. Kethvar seemed to sense her reluctance. Whatever happens, he said, we are bound now. Distance cannot change that. The transmitter had not only survived the storm but seemed to be functioning better than before. The storm's electromagnetic effects had somehow enhanced the crystal matrices, increasing their power output by nearly 30%. We could complete the beacon array in half the time I originally estimated, Sarah said, studying the readings with mixed emotions. Then we should begin immediately.
Kethvar replied, though she could sense through their bond that he felt the same reluctance she did.
Over the following days, they threw themselves into the work with renewed energy. Their connection seemed to enhance their individual abilities. Sarah found herself understanding Zeltharian engineering principles intuitively, while Kethvar grasped human technological concepts with increasing sophistication. They traveled across the continent, placing transmitter nodes at carefully calculated positions. Each journey revealed new wonders: crystal caverns that sang with harmonic frequencies, geothermal vents that painted the sky with rainbow auroras, ancient impact craters filled with formations that looked like frozen music. "This planet is beautiful," Sarah said one evening, as they camped beside a field of crystal flowers that chimed softly in the wind. "I almost understand why we crashed here." "Perhaps it was not an accident," Kethvar suggested. "Perhaps the universe decided that our peoples needed to learn something that could only be taught here." Sarah leaned against him, marveling at how natural it felt to share his warmth and strength. Through their bond, she could sense his growing certainty that their meeting was part of something larger, a pattern too vast for either of their species to perceive clearly. "What do you think will happen when rescue comes?" she asked. "I believe that will depend on how we present our situation. If we approach this correctly, we may be able to change the relationship between our peoples. And if we approach it incorrectly?" Kethvar was quiet for a long moment. "Then we may be separated forever, and the chance for peace will be lost." That night, as they lay together beneath the alien stars, Sarah made a decision. When rescue came, and she was increasingly confident that it would, she would not hide their relationship or apologize for what they had become. She would stand with Kethvar and face whatever consequences arose. They were bound now, not just by the ritual of his people, but by something deeper. They had created something unprecedented, a bridge between two species that had known only conflict. Whatever the future held, they would face it together. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah felt a new presence stirring within her, something that was neither fully human nor Zelfarian, but somehow both. She smiled in the darkness, understanding that their bond had created more than just a connection between two individuals. It had created the foundation for an entirely new form of life. Sarah knew something had changed the moment she woke up. It wasn't just the usual sensation she had grown accustomed to since bonding with Kethvar. The awareness of his presence, the gentle flow of shared emotions, the synchronization of their biological rhythms. This was something entirely new, a third presence that seemed to pulse with its own unique energy signature. She lay still for several minutes, trying to understand what she was experiencing. The sensation was centered in her abdomen, a warm, growing awareness that felt both foreign and utterly familiar. As understanding dawned, she sat up quickly, her heart racing. "Kethvar," she whispered, and he was awake instantly, his enhanced senses detecting the change in her biochemistry. "Sarah?" "What is wrong?" "I think," she began, then stopped, hardly daring to voice what she suspected. "I think I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a revelation that changed everything. Kethvar stared at her for a long moment, his expression cycling through surprise, wonder, and something that might have been fear. "That should not be possible," he said quietly. "Our species are too different, the genetic incompatibility alone." "I know what should be possible," Sarah replied, placing a hand over her abdomen. "But I can feel it, Kethvar. There's a new life growing inside me, and it's both human and Zelfarian." Through their bond, she could sense his amazement warring with his scientific skepticism. Kethvar was a rational being, trained in the precise disciplines of navigation and engineering. The idea that their mating could have resulted in viable offspring challenged everything he understood about biology and genetics. But as he reached out and placed his hand over hers, they both felt it, a tiny spark of consciousness that was unmistakably their child. "How is this possible?" he breathed. Sarah was already moving toward the ship's medical bay, her mind racing with possibilities. "The bonding ceremony," she said. "When we connected at the cellular level, maybe something changed. Maybe we're more compatible than either of our species realized." The medical scanners confirmed what they had both sensed through their bond. Sarah was indeed pregnant, approximately 3 weeks along, by human standards. But the readings were unlike anything in the medical databases. The developing embryo showed characteristics of both human and Zelfarian physiology, somehow integrating genetic material that should have been incompatible. "The child has a dual nervous system," Sarah observed, studying the detailed scans with growing amazement. "Human and Zelfarian neural pathways developing in parallel. And look at these cellular structures. They're incorporating elements from both our species' biochemistries." Kethvar leaned over her shoulder, his larger frame warming her as they examined the medical data together. "The DNA analysis shows a perfect integration rather than a simple combination." "Dang in!" as if some force has taken the best characteristics from both our species and woven them into something entirely new. Sarah felt a flutter of movement, impossibly early by human standards, but the bond had heightened all her senses. Their child was already developing faster than a purely human infant would, but not following the rapid gestation cycle of Zeltharian reproduction either. Instead, it seemed to be following its own unique pattern. "We need to modify the medical bay," Sarah said, understanding instinctively that normal human or Zeltharian prenatal care would be inadequate for their child. "Create monitoring systems that can track both physiologies simultaneously." Over the following days, they worked together to create unprecedented medical technology. Combining human diagnostic equipment with Zeltharian biometric sensors, they built a monitoring system that could track the complex development taking place within Sarah's body. The results were extraordinary. Their child was developing abilities that neither species possessed individually: enhanced cognitive capacity, improved physical coordination, and most remarkably, what appeared to be natural telepathic abilities that manifested even in the womb. "It's remarkable," Sarah said one evening as they watched real-time scans of their child's developing brain. "Look at these neural density readings. Our baby is going to be significantly more intelligent than either humans or Zeltharians." "Intelligence is not the only gift our child will possess," Kethvar observed, pointing to other readings. "See these cellular structures? They suggest an enhanced immune system and improved physical resilience. Our child may be able to survive in environments that would kill either of our parent species." Through their bond, they could both sense the child's growing awareness. Sometimes Sarah would wake in the night to find herself experiencing fragmentary dreams that belonged to neither her nor Kethvar. Simple impressions of warmth, safety, and love that could only be coming from their unborn baby. "Our child is already learning from both of us," Sarah realized. "Through the bond, it's experiencing our thoughts and emotions. When it's born, it will understand both human and Zeltharian perspectives instinctively." As Sarah's pregnancy progressed, they made a remarkable discovery about their rescue beacon project. The child's developing telepathic abilities seemed to enhance their own connection, which in turn improved their ability to work with the crystal matrices. Their transmitter nodes became more powerful and efficient with each passing day. "It's as if our child is somehow amplifying our bond," Kethvar observed as they tested their latest modifications. "The crystals respond more readily to our combined bioelectric fields." Sarah placed a hand on her growing belly, feeling the strong flutter of movement within. At 12 weeks, their child was already more active than a human fetus would be at full term, but showed none of the rapid development that characterized Zeltharian pregnancies either. "Maybe that's what this is all about," she said. "Maybe our child represents something new, a bridge between our species that could change everything." Their conversation was interrupted by an urgent beep from the communication array. Sarah's heart leaped. After weeks of silence, they were receiving a transmission. Racing to the communications console, they watched as the signal resolved into recognizable patterns. It was a standard Zeltharian hail, asking for identification and status. "It's a search vessel," Kethvar said, his voice tight with emotion. "They've found us." Sarah felt a complex mixture of relief and apprehension. Rescue meant safety for her and their unborn child, but it also meant facing questions they weren't prepared to answer. How would they explain what had happened between them? How would their respective species react to news of the pregnancy? "We respond truthfully," Kethvar said, sensing her thoughts through their bond. "We tell them exactly what has occurred." Sarah nodded, though she could feel her heart racing. "Together! Together!" Kethvar activated the communication system and began broadcasting in his own language. Sarah listened as he identified himself and his situation, explaining about the crash, their survival efforts, and her presence. When he mentioned their bonding and her pregnancy, she could hear the shock in the response from the Zeltharian vessel. "They're requesting immediate visual confirmation," Kethvar translated. "The captain cannot believe what I've told him." They activated the visual communication array, and Sarah found herself face to face with her first Zeltharian captain. He was older than Kethvar, with more pronounced facial ridges and ceremonial scarification that marked him as a senior navigator. His expression was one of complete bewilderment. "Navigator Kethvar," the captain said in accented but clear English, "you will explain this situation more clearly. You claim to have bonded with a human female?" "I do claim this, Captain Veltar," Kethvar replied formally. "Dr. Sarah Chen and I have formed a life bond according to the ancient customs. She carries my child." Captain Veltar's expression shifted through several emotions before settling on what Sarah could only interpret as awe. "This is unprecedented." The Council of Navigators must be informed immediately.
Are you certain the bonding was successful?
In response, Kethvar took Sarah's hand. Even through the video transmission, the Zeltharian captain could apparently sense something of their connection. His eyes widened in surprise.
Remarkable, he breathed. I can perceive the bond signature even at this distance. You have indeed joined with this human. He paused, studying Sarah's image intently. Dr. Chen, are you aware of what has been done? I am, Sarah replied steadily, and I participated willingly in everything that has occurred. The child, Captain Veltar continued. You are certain it is viable? More than viable, Sarah said, placing a protective hand over her belly. Our baby is developing characteristics from both our species. It may represent an entirely new form of life. The captain was quiet for several minutes, obviously receiving additional communications from other members of his crew. When he spoke again, his voice carried a weight of authority that Sarah had not heard before. Navigator Kethvar, Dr. Chen, I am ordering both of you to remain exactly where you are. Do not attempt any further modifications to your beacon array. Do not leave your current location for any reason. Captain, Kethvar began, but Veltar cut him off. This situation is far beyond my authority to handle. I am transmitting emergency protocols to both the Zeltharian High Council and the Earth Colonial Authority. Representatives from both governments are being dispatched to this system immediately. Sarah felt her stomach sink. High-level government involvement meant examinations, interrogations, and quite possibly separation from Kethvar, while bureaucrats decided what to do about their unprecedented situation. How long until they arrive? She asked. The Zeltharian delegation will reach us in 6 days. The human representatives will arrive approximately 2 days later. After the transmission ended, Sarah and Kethvar sat together in the ship's common area, both lost in their own thoughts. Through their bond, Sarah could sense his mixture of anticipation and dread. He wanted their child to be safe and accepted, but he feared the reaction of both their governments. What will they do to us? Sarah asked quietly. I do not know, Kethvar admitted. There are no precedents for this situation, no laws or customs that apply to a bonded pair from different species. Sarah placed her hands on her belly, feeling the strong movements of their child within. At 16 weeks, the baby was already as large as a human infant at full term, but showed no signs of being ready for birth. Their child was following its own developmental timeline, taking whatever time it needed to fully integrate the complex genetic heritage they had given it. Whatever happens, she said, our child will be extraordinary. It will understand both our peoples in ways that no one else ever has. Maybe that's what the galaxy needs. Someone who can bridge the gap between human and Zeltharian thinking. Kethvar pulled her closer, his warmth surrounding her like a protective embrace. Our child will be the first of a new kind of being, he agreed. Neither human nor Zeltharian, but something greater than both. Through their bond, they both felt a flutter of response from their unborn baby. A sense of agreement, of understanding that even in the womb, their child was listening and learning. It knows we're talking about it, Sarah marveled. Of course it knows, Kethvar replied. Our child has been part of our bond since conception. It understands more about us than we understand about ourselves. That night, as they lay together under the alien stars, Sarah dreamed of the future. She saw their child grown to adulthood, tall and graceful like a Zeltharian, but with human warmth and adaptability. She saw it standing before the leaders of both species, speaking words of understanding and peace that no pure-blooded human or Zeltharian could have spoken. She saw a future where their love had changed the galaxy itself. And in her dreams, she heard her unborn child's voice for the first time, speaking directly to her mind with thoughts that were crystal clear. Do not fear what is coming, Mother. I am exactly what the universe needs me to be. When Sarah woke, she found that Kethvar had experienced the same dream. Through their bond, their child had shared its vision of the future with both parents. A future of peace, understanding, and unity that began with the unprecedented love between a human woman and a Zeltharian navigator stranded on an alien world. The first ships appeared in the system 8 days later, arriving within hours of each other, as if choreographed by some cosmic sense of timing. From their shelter aboard the Prometheus, Sarah and Kethvar watched as the sleek Zeltharian vessels and the more angular human cruisers took up positions around Kepler 442c, neither fleet quite trusting the other despite the unprecedented nature of their joint mission. Sarah was now 20 weeks pregnant, her body showing the unmistakable signs of carrying a child who was developing unlike any human or Zeltharian infant in recorded history. Through their bond, she could feel the baby's awareness of the approaching ships, a sense of anticipation that seemed to mirror her own mixture of hope and anxiety. Incoming transmission from both fleets. Kethvar announced as the communication array came alive with multiple signals. They're requesting a joint conference.
Sarah smoothed her hands over her expanded belly, feeling their child's responsive movement.
Are you ready for this? We will face this together, he replied, taking her hand and squeezing gently. Whatever they decide, we have created something wonderful. The main view screen activated to reveal a split image. On one side, Admiral Patricia Zhang of the Earth Colonial Authority, her weathered face stern but not unkind. On the other, High Navigator Shalteth of the Zeltharian Deep Fleet, his ancient features bearing the ritual scarification of supreme rank. Dr. Chen, Admiral Zhang began. I've read the preliminary reports from Captain Veltar, but I need to hear this directly from you. You claim to have bonded with the Zeltharian male? That's correct, Admiral, Sarah replied steadily. Navigator Kethvar and I have formed a life bond according to Zeltharian custom. We did so of our own free will, after working together for several weeks to ensure our mutual survival. High Navigator Shalteth leaned forward, his large eyes studying both of them intently. Navigator Kethvar, you understand the gravity of what you have done. To bond with an alien species without the approval of the Council is unprecedented. I understand completely, High Navigator, Kethvar replied formally, but I also understand that sometimes the greatest truths can only be discovered by venturing into uncharted territory. Admiral Zhang's expression was unreadable. Dr. Chen, our medical officers need to examine you immediately. The reports of an interspecies pregnancy are difficult to believe. I understand your skepticism, Sarah said, but our child is very real. Would you like to see the medical scans we've compiled? For the next hour, they transmitted their detailed medical data to both fleets. Sarah watched the faces of the various officers and scientists as they reviewed the unprecedented biological readings. She could see skepticism giving way to amazement, then to something that might have been fear. The genetic integration is beyond our current understanding of biological science, reported Dr. Elizabeth Harrison, the ECA's chief xenobiologist. The fetal development patterns suggest characteristics from both species that shouldn't be able to coexist. Our own biological specialists confirm these findings, added researcher Kelthard, the Zeltharian Fleet's senior life scientist.
The developing organism displays neural complexity that exceeds both human and Zeltharian baselines.
Its projected cognitive capacity is extraordinary. Admiral Zhang exchanged a meaningful look with High Navigator Shalteth before speaking again. Dr. Chen, Navigator Kethvar, I need both of you to understand the implications of what you've done. If your child is viable, it represents a fundamental shift in the relationship between our species. There are those in both governments who will see this as either a great opportunity or a significant threat. And which do you see it as? Sarah asked directly. The Admiral was quiet for a moment. I see it as a miracle that might finally bring peace to our corner of the galaxy. But I'm also a realist, and I know that miracles often come with a very high price. High Navigator Shalteth spoke with the weight of centuries of tradition behind his words. The child must be born under neutral circumstances, with representatives from both species present to ensure its safety and proper documentation. This world, where the bond was formed, seems appropriate for such a birth. You're asking us to remain here until the baby is born? Sarah asked. We are requiring it, Admiral Zhang replied firmly. Both fleets will establish permanent orbital stations to provide security and medical support. This is too important to handle any other way. Over the following days, Kepler 442c was transformed from a desolate world into the most closely watched location in known space. Medical facilities were constructed near their crash site, staffed with the finest doctors and scientists from both species. Communication arrays were deployed to maintain constant contact with the home governments. Most remarkably, human and Zeltharian personnel began working together for the first time in 30 years, united by their shared fascination with the unprecedented pregnancy. Sarah found herself the subject of constant but respectful monitoring. The medical teams were amazed by how well her body was adapting to carry a child with hybrid physiology. Her own biological systems had somehow modified themselves to provide exactly what the developing baby needed, as if guided by some intelligence beyond current scientific understanding. Your cellular structure has undergone modifications that should have taken thousands of years of evolution. Dr. Harrison observed during one examination. It's as if your body instinctively knew how to nurture a hybrid child. The bonding process, suggested Dr. Thalanis, the Zeltharian medical specialist who had become Sarah's primary physician. When two beings join at the cellular level, perhaps unforeseen adaptations become possible. But it was their child who provided the greatest surprises. At 28 weeks, the baby began communicating directly with both parents through their bond, sharing not just emotions but complex thoughts and even rudimentary concepts. Sarah would often wake to find herself understanding mathematical principles or stellar navigation techniques that her child had apparently learned by observing Kethvar's memories. Our baby is already more intelligent than most adult humans, Sarah marveled one evening as she and Kethvar sat together watching the sunset over the crystalline landscape. Sometimes I can feel it analyzing the medical scans of its own development. It understands its own uniqueness. Kethvar agreed. Through our bond, it has access to both human and Zeltharian knowledge. It is literally learning from two entire civilizations while still in the womb. The child's extraordinary development had not gone unnoticed by the scientific teams. Regular conferences were held between human and Zeltharian researchers, sharing data and theories about the baby's capabilities. For the first time in decades, the two species were cooperating rather than competing. Your child is facilitating more scientific collaboration than 30 years of diplomacy, Admiral Jane observed during one of her visits to the surface. Human and Zeltharian researchers are sharing information freely, united by their desire to understand this unique life you've created. As Sarah entered her final trimester, the orbital stations around Kepler, 442c, had grown into a small city of ships from both species. Representatives from every major scientific institution in human and Zeltharian space had arrived to witness the birth that would change everything. But it was during this time that Sarah began to experience something that terrified her more than any government reaction or scientific scrutiny. Through her bond with their child, she began to sense other presences, ancient intelligences that seemed to be watching from the spaces between stars. "Kethvar," she said one night as they lay together in their expanded quarters, "I think we're not alone out here." "You mean the fleets?" "No. Something else. Something old. I can feel it through our connection with the baby. Intelligences that have been watching our galaxy for eons, waiting for something like our child to be born." Through their bond, Kethvar experienced her perceptions secondhand. His eyes widened as he sensed what she was describing. Vast, patient minds that regarded the development of their hybrid child with something approaching reverence. Galactic civilization has been watched and guided all along, he realized. The conflicts between our species, the development of our technologies, even our meeting on this world, it's all been part of some larger pattern. Their child responded to their conversation with a complex emotional signal that conveyed understanding, acceptance, and a profound sense of purpose. Through their bond, they both received a startling revelation. Their baby would not be just the first hybrid of their two species, but the herald of a new age of galactic development. "Our child will be the bridge," Sarah whispered, understanding flooding through her. "Not just between humans and Zeltharians, but between our young civilizations and the ancient powers that have been guiding galactic evolution." The birth began during the planet's long dawn, when both suns were visible in the orange sky and the crystal formations sang with harmonic resonance. Sarah felt the first contractions while standing in their garden, a small plot where they had successfully grown earth vegetables in Zeltharian soil using techniques their bond had helped them develop. "It's time," she told Kethvar, who immediately sensed the change through their connection. The medical teams mobilized with unprecedented coordination. Human and Zeltharian doctors worked together seamlessly, their monitoring equipment displaying readouts that defied every known law of biology. The child was coming into the world following its own unique timeline, neither human nor Zeltharian, but somehow perfectly natural. As the labor progressed, Sarah became aware of the ancient watchers focusing their attention on Kepler. 442c. Through her bond with the baby, she could sense their anticipation, their satisfaction that the long-planned convergence was finally occurring. "The child is positioned normally," Dr. Harrison reported. "But these readings are unlike anything we've ever seen. Brain activity is off the charts, and there's some kind of energy field surrounding the fetus." "It's the bond," Dr. Zachary Delanis observed. "The child is drawing strength from both parents simultaneously. It's using their combined life force to ease its own transition to independent existence." And then, after 18 hours of labor that felt both eternal and instantaneous, Their daughter was born. She was perfect, clearly carrying characteristics of both species but somehow more than the sum of her genetic parts. Her skin had a subtle luminescence that was purely Zeltharian, but her features held an expressive mobility that was distinctly human. Her eyes, when they opened, held an awareness that was ancient and knowing. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered as the baby was placed on her chest. "We've been waiting to meet you." Their daughter's response came not as a cry, but as a gentle mental touch that both parents felt through their bond. A greeting that conveyed love, gratitude, and a vast sense of purpose that seemed far beyond her infant state. As the medical teams conducted their examinations, the baby submitted with patient cooperation that amazed everyone present. Her vital signs were stable, her development perfect by any measure they could apply. Most remarkably, she seemed to be actively communicating with the monitoring equipment, somehow optimizing its readings to provide the most accurate data possible. "She's helping us study her," Dr. Harrison said in amazement. "This infant is consciously cooperating with our examination procedures." High Navigator Schulteth arrived that evening to witness the first interspecies child in galactic history. As he approached the infant, she turned to study him with eyes that seemed far older than her hours of existence. "She knows who I am," he said with wonder. "Through your bond, she has inherited knowledge of Zeltharian culture and customs." He paused, studying the child's alert gaze. "But there is something else. Something vast and ancient that watches through her eyes." Admiral Zhang's reaction was equally profound when she met the child the next day. "Dr. Chen, Navigator Kethvar, I believe your daughter represents the next stage of galactic evolution. The intelligence I see in those eyes is beyond anything our species have produced individually." As the days passed, their daughter continued to exceed every expectation. She grew rapidly but steadily, her development following patterns that integrated the best characteristics of both parent species. More remarkably, her presence seemed to enhance the cooperation between humans and Zeltharians working in the orbital stations. "Conflict resolution between our personnel has improved by 300% since the child's birth," reported Commander Sarah Mitchell, the station's diplomatic liaison. "It's as if her very existence makes our people want to work together." Sarah understood why. Through her bond with their daughter, she could sense the child's natural ability to perceive the underlying unity between all intelligent species. Her daughter saw past the superficial differences between humans and Zeltharians to the deeper commonalities that united all conscious life. "She's going to change everything," Sarah said one evening as she nursed their 3-week-old daughter, "not just between our species, but throughout the galaxy." "The Ancient Ones are pleased," Kethvar observed, sensing through their bond the vast satisfaction of the Watchers in deep space. This is what they have been waiting for, a bridge between young civilizations and the greater galactic community. Their daughter responded to their conversation with a complex emotional signal that conveyed understanding, acceptance, and determination. Even as an infant, she knew her purpose. She would grow up to be the herald of a new age, the living proof that cooperation and unity could overcome any barrier. As the months passed and their daughter continued to develop at her own unique pace, delegations from across known space began arriving at Kepler 442c. The world that had once been a barren prison had become the most important location in the galaxy, the birthplace of a new form of life that would reshape interstellar civilization. And in the crystalline gardens where they had first learned to trust each other completely, Sarah and Kethvar raised their extraordinary daughter, knowing that their love had accomplished something that would echo throughout the cosmos for generations to come. Their child was the living bridge between worlds, the proof that the universe's greatest achievements came not from conquest or dominance, but from the courage to love beyond the boundaries of species, culture, and fear. Humanity had indeed proven itself to be extraordinary, not through superior firepower or technology, but through the fundamental human willingness to embrace the impossible and make it real through the simple, revolutionary act of love.